Looking to create your best self, whether it's good for you lifestyle hacks, smarter ways to supplement, or tasty tips to fuel optimal health, Talk Healthy Today provides you the latest research tools and common sense tips you need to get and stay healthy starting today. Hi, I'm Lisa Davis. So glad you're listening to Talk Healthy Today. I am absolutely in love with doing this podcast. I would be thrilled if you rated, reviewed, and subscribed to the podcast. Now, on to the show. This podcast is lovingly sponsored by Naropa University. Since 1974, Naropa faculty have been helping students develop their inner awareness and heart-centered motivations. If you or someone you know wants to live a purpose-driven, embodied life in order to change the world, go to naropa.edu. You are ready for Naropa, where experiential learning meets academic rigor, and we are ready for you. naropa.edu. Hi, I'm Lisa Davis. So glad you're listening to Talk Healthy Today. If you've listened to the show, you know I have a complex relationship with yoga. My mother forcing me to do it when I was 14 to help my scoliosis when she found out the back brace was not an option anymore. I actually worked with an incredible yoga teacher, Ramanand Patel, who I hear from people are like, oh my gosh, you worked with him? I was 14. I did not appreciate it at all. I was there and it hurt. And I look back and I think, wow, if my mother had taken the time to explain more, I think she honestly didn't know. I think she thought of it just as a form of exercise, yet it is so much more. The reason I bring this up is that we're talking with the wonderful Nataraja Kallio, and we're going to be talking about working with intense emotions. Nataraja is a professor at Naropa University in Boulder, Colorado, where he helped pioneer both undergraduate and graduate degree programs in yoga studies. He has an extensive background in both yoga studies and psychology. Nataraja, it's so great to have you on.
Oh, wonderful to be here. Thank you, Lisa.
Such a pleasure. First of all, I've always wanted to go to Boulder. Is it as lovely as they say it is?
It is, nested right in the foothills of the Rocky Mountains. So we have this backdrop of kind of infinite wilderness.
Oh, sounds amazing. I lived in Santa Cruz for many years, and I hear that it's similar in terms of the vibe. I know Santa Cruz has actually changed a lot, but I was there in the 80s, and it was just fabulous.
I am actually a banana slug.
Me too.
Yeah, right on.
Woohoo, UCSC, if people don't know what we're talking about.
Exactly.
Like, I'm a banana slug.
The greatest of all mascots.
Yes. Let's talk a little bit about your name. You had mentioned before the interview, when I was asking you the pronunciation, Nataraja, that this was not a name that you had given to yourself, as some might imagine, due to your work, but this was actually a name your parents gave you. So tell us about your upbringing. Yeah,
a little more complicated than that. I was actually a product of the 60s generation. So I was raised in a Hindu community centered around an Indian teacher. And us kids being born were given Sanskrit names and raised in some sort of yogic lifestyle. So like you, I was, I kind of was indoctrinated into yoga and kind of from my mom thought, yeah, it's kind of lame, Ma. It's something that my mom does, but not that I want to do. But, not uncommon to many spiritual communities. It fell apart, due to kind of neglected psychological material and abuse and megalomania in kind of the teacher. And to make a long story short, I actually ended up in India for quite a few years where I rediscovered yoga more from a personal kind of passion and interest.
Oh, wow. That sounds really intense. I'm sorry that happened.
Well, it's also, I think, just kind of a insightful glimpse into, the nature of communities, but also kind of our human psyche and how much, spiritual work can be undermined if it's not really grappling with kind of what's under the hood, psychologically.
Yeah, it sounds like some narcissism there.
Mm-hmm.
And that, as we've seen, that can be so destructive.
Absolutely, yeah.
Now, when did you decide that yoga was for you? Because as you mentioned, you were like, that's what my mom does. But when did it was like, okay, wait a second, this is working for me?
Well, I was 18. The community had fallen apart. And I found myself in Nepal. And, I had a 30-day visa, but the 3 had smudged into an 8. So I thought I had 80 days, which I only discovered was a mistake when I was 70 days into my trip. And as an 18-year-old, rather than call my parents for help or explain it to the immigration authorities, because there was quite a financial penalty for overstaying the visa that long, my first thought was, I'll just sneak out of Nepal. So I orchestrated this great escape from Nepal into India. I got caught, haggled my way out. And so
Wow.
actually arrived in India, not with some great noble aspiration to study yoga, but really to kind of extricate myself from a legal situation in Nepal. But nevertheless, really encountered both kind of yogic and Buddhist traditions in a way that I think, just deeply impacted me and kind of became a lifelong pursuit and passion. So I ended up spending much of the next kind of 15 years going back and forth between the United States and India, really to study, and had the fortune to meet a number of, I think very awake teachers that helped, kind of deepen my own understanding and learning, which, kind of in a circuitous way landed me at Naropa University, where it's the only undergraduate yoga studies program we find.
Now, how did those teachers, how did they either inspire you or get you to see yoga in different ways that maybe you hadn't seen it, or maybe even that you had, but kind of deepen that understanding?
I think for what really landed was, the mentors I had that beyond, the teachings took the time to really, get to know me, kind of see where my shadows were, those places I preferred to avoid or not engage within myself. So really forced me to engage practice not as a means of escape, but to leave nothing unturned, no kind of facet of self ignored. And of course, that journey is by no means done, but it did help me reorient to practice from a perspective of kind of aspiring to include every facet of my human experience on the journey. Kind of sobering realization that, I only evolve as much as my kind of lesser function, or those facets of self that I would prefer not be felt or seen.
Now, did that help you with the, I don't know if you'd say trauma or what happened with your community growing up?
Well, I think it certainly helped me understand, how either collectively in a community or individually we can be, sabotaged by failing to look at, the full range of our human capacity and limitations. Yeah.
When I was talking about my experience growing up and I mentioned Ramanand Patel, you kind of smiled and shook your head. Did you have experience with him?
Yeah, so I spent a lot of time in the Iyengar tradition, different teachers within the Iyengar tradition, not so much Ramanand Patel, but Adil Palkiwala and Iyengar himself. So I'm certainly steeped in the Iyengar tradition.
Now let's talk about Naropa University. I love on this site, it says Naropa Bachelor of Arts in Yoga Studies is more than a yoga teacher training and yoga certification program. Here you'll embrace yogic practice as a way of life, be transformed on and off the mat at the nation's first yoga university. It looks like it's so interesting. What makes it more, like it says, than just a yoga teacher and training?
Well, people often ask, what is this name Naropa? And I think it gives insight into kind of the DNA of Naropa, but it's actually drawn from an 11th century figure who was a prodigious scholar and head of, at the time, the largest, most esteemed kind of university in Asia called Nalanda. Mm-hmm. And, to make a long story short, he had this chance encounter with a wise old woman who we later learn is kind of the wisdom goddess in disguise. Who essentially points out to Naropa that all of his prestigious learning and accomplishments, amounted to diddly squat, as he didn't truly understand the real meaning of things, right? But just the words. And I think it was a testament to his aspiration that he left his position to set out to really understand what's the deal. I mean, what's really the heart of these teachings. And after an arduous outer and inner journey, he attained some, deep level of realization. So I think Naropa was, the name chosen for this university because it symbolizes kind of our aspiration to synthesize both intellect and heart, academic and experiential learning. So, of course, yoga studies is, a great example of this because it's simultaneously a diverse history and body of philosophies that really lends to academic study. So we can really understand the history of these philosophies and not mangle history to make it something other than what it is. But it's also, of course, this incredibly rich field of, psycho-spiritual somatic practices, as well as also intimating a state of being. So similarly, we engage the study from all three dimensions, academic, practice, and experiential, trying to synthesize those together, which is, somewhat taboo still in modern academia, that to study something, you need to remain, an objective outsider, lest you be biased or influenced by your own personal proclivities.
Now, talk to us about the psychology, because today we're talking about working with intense emotions, and it's looking at it through your background in yoga and psychology. How do those come together, and how do they come together at Naropa?
Psychology is certainly one of the largest programs, undergraduate and graduate, within Naropa.
Wonderful.
And it's certainly been two of my largest interests in my own background. Done my graduate work in psychology and, of course, a lifelong study in yoga studies. I think, and just kind of like panning out first, human beings have had such a long, conflicted relationship with emotions. Philosophers, theologians, even the pioneers of psychology have almost been kind of uniformly negative in their view of emotions. And, basically these unfortunate forces that cause us to do irrational and regrettable things. And in, like religion often viewed as our lower nature or the causes of our suffering, which we have to subdue or eradicate. So, a lot of even early yoga and Buddhism, they followed these kind of transcendental or ascetic, not aesthetic, but ascetic arcs. How do we extricate ourselves, from these binds that torment us? But I think, whether you're in the domain of psychology or spirituality, it's as much as we'd often like to think we're Spock-like, if we take a peek under the hood, it's, wow, emotions motivate all of our behavior. And so accessing and reclaiming emotional, intelligence is so important because, for many of us, for whatever cultural or religious interjects we may have received, kind of created this inherent kind of lack of permission to feel our feelings or to work with them, skillfully. And I'm sure none of your viewers, but self for sure, get a little emotionally constipated at times, right? So,
yeah,
because emotions get regulated by guilt or shame or avoidance, which inevitably creates like greater rigidity and takes all the more energy to defend or to not feel. But given that it's kind of the way we filter our experience, these signals that give us such an important and immediate read as to the nature of our experience, this non-acceptance or avoidance causes us, to lose access to this incredibly important kind of range of intelligence, as well as, means by which we might reclaim some sort of well-being.
Yeah, one thing that my husband and I have always taught my daughter, she's 17 now, actually our daughter, is you just that emotions are okay, and feel your emotions and talk about your emotions, because you can't get around it. You got to go through it. Mm-hmm. And one of the things I find so heartbreaking in this society is how often I'll see parents saying, especially to boys, don't cry, or even to girls, oh, just, get over it, suck it up. I remember I had a neighbor, and she told her 2-year-old to build a bridge and get over it. And she's like chuckling with a friend. Right. They thought that was so clever. And I thought, this is just sad.
Yeah.
that whole other saying that I can't stand is you get what you get and you don't get upset.
Right.
I like you get what you get and you can be upset, but you're still just going to get that, right? So if my kid's screaming for a toy in the store, it's okay to be upset. I'm still not going to buy it for you, but it's okay to have your feelings. God, what an amazing society we would have if that was the model. I wish we could change that paradigm. Hopefully by talking about it, somebody will be like, oh, that is a better way.
Right. Yeah, I was just thinking of some of the interjects we receive in this culture, like, boys don't cry or girls don't show anger, that kind of set up early on a rigid relationship of permission to feel and express some, but negate others. But even if we look back kind of at human evolution, we see that certain emotional reactions have been highly conserved, if we find them as present in our animal predecessors, as we do us, it's probably intimating they're here for a reason, and even especially the ones we get such a bad reputation, like fear. Without fear, we'd, see a mountain lion and think, oh, maybe that looks like a cuddly creature. I'd be remiss to remind us not to cuddle with mountain lions, but that in their core, these emotions are here to help kind of like move us towards thriving and surviving, right?
Yeah.
Which is unfortunate news if, we were under the impression that if we just made all the right decisions or took the right food or did the right practices or kind of psychological affirmations, that we'd feel good all the time, which is kind of ubiquitous across the spectrum of psychological and religious and spiritual traditions. But it would be like if you had a compass and you just put the magnet on west, like bliss all the time. You'd lose range to so many of the other important facets of our experience that help kind of direct us, kind of intelligently.
Right.
I think, all the kind of the biological and evolutionary background of emotions kind of just leads to that big conclusion you're saying. What a great idea to, accept our emotions, reclaim kind of this incredibly important field of our experience.
Yeah, I want to let you and the listeners know I did confront this woman. Didn't go well. She was not a nice person. We ended up moving, actually, but at any rate, yeah, I'm one of those people, like, I take action, even though I know most parents don't want you to tell them how to parent, right? But I just felt like, maybe if you try this, don't be judgy or mean about it, but like, I don't know if you've ever heard, but active listening is really cool, and she's like, shut up. Okay. But I feel like we have to try.
I have two young daughters, and so I have the sobering, experience of how, little kids are like sponges. Oh, yeah. They so mirror the way that we process emotion and sensation. They kind of like lap that up. So, but also just still being quite young, just how emotions just kind of rise and they make no sense to me at times, but also dissipate with such ease and lack of, inhibition. And it's quite inspiring to see that.
Yeah, I agree.
Just uninhibited, kind of upswelling and release and movement on to the next emotional experience. Yeah.
Yeah. Rather than just packing it all in.
In.
Not dealing with it. One thing that really helped me, it's called bioenergetic therapy. And I probably won't be able to explain it super well, but what it did for me was I was able to get deeper into my grief and pain and loss and trauma by getting in different positions in my body that would open me up, but they were also kind of uncomfortable. But it was like the combination that really allowed me to just feel in such a deep way and to release in a way that I hadn't experienced. I guess it was about probably 20 years maybe after my mother had passed. And I had cried, but I didn't really feel the intensity until I started doing bioenergetic therapy. And I literally one day in therapy, I fell to the ground. I was crying, like it was amazing. And I felt like this weight. Is the grief all gone? No. Is it still hard? Yes. But it was this thing that I needed to do. And I'm wondering if there's any sort of yoga or yogic poses have you found that help people go deeper, or is that like a different kind of thing? I think body work with emotions is so powerful.
Well, I think, you just touched on such an important point. It's just first the appreciation that emotions are bodily events. They're somatic events. They happen in and as bodily sensation, which gives us a big, I think, clue in how to work with them. So we see that in, the yoga tradition, there's been quite a range of the way that emotions have been viewed and worked with. But I think of particular interest, one of the later advents of yoga was the Tantra, and which kind of had this reorientation towards our human experience that reflected more of an acceptance of the full range of our human existence, if not even an indirect route to kind of evolution or spiritual awakening, which is kind of a counterpoint to some of its ascetic predecessors that sought more to how do we extricate ourselves from all of this experience. And, in very general terms, but, Tantra in some ways is allied with the alchemical traditions of the world. Alchemy coming from this Arabic word, alchemet, which means, the dark earth. And, early alchemists who took it literally, they sought all over the world for this rich material that, if brought through a precise series of sequences, could turn something not valuable into something very valuable. Gold, for example. But, the yogis, I think, took it more as metaphoric, right? That that dark earth is nothing other than, I don't know, the other day my sink was plugged, so I had to go turn off the water and go under and undo my U-trap. And, if you ever cleaned out your U-trap, what you get is like, it makes most of us cringe, right?
Kind of sludge monster.
Right. We'd like to avoid that or not have to work with it. But, of course, it's kind of psychologically, that's kind of the richest material in some ways. Right. So how do we work with particularly that dimension of our experience that is the most tenacious, that does create the greatest battle within us, in a way that we might actually even access kind of the wisdom energy within it. Sally Kempton likened these heavy afflictive emotions to like dragons, right? If dragons are often those fire-breathing creatures that hoard treasure, that treasure being like our vitality, our life force, that if we try and slay the dragon, it breathes fire and destroys us. But if we don't engage the dragon, then it just continues to hoard our treasure. And so like dragons are like those heavy duty core emotions, grief or jealousy or rage or self-loathing or inadequacy, or numbness. So we find kind of in this more later development of yoga, kind of, I think, insightful ways of working with this kind of most afflictive dimension of our human experience. And one of the first steps is first the view, like we were talking about, is, not to fear them, not to avoid them. Can we see, these storms inside of us, like we would witness storms outside of us, with some sort of appreciation or even wonderment. So not to take them so personally. Realizing, they have no one to afflict, like an outer storm, that they're just raw expressions of our own kind of life force. Right. And maybe even further, become curious about them, to turn towards them. Because so often, it's counterintuitive to turn towards those experiences we most would like not to feel. We bounce off of them, moving into hyperthinking or, whatever avenue of distraction. So I think the first step is just turning, kind of a view, like, oh, okay, let's get interested. Let's get curious about this. And then I think the next gesture is like the mountain lion, or a good judo practitioner, aikido practitioner, to offer no resistance, but also not try and battle or get rid of it. My daughter, she was had learned this song from a local group called Jeff and Paige, who sing songs about the natural world and what you do if you see a wild animal like a mountain lion or bear. Which is, stop, get big. You're not on the bear's menu, right? So she encountered a mama bear the other day, and she remembered the song. So rather than run, of course, she wasn't going to attack it. She just stopped, took a breath, right? And then slowly moved back. And it's like, oh, wow, you remembered that. I don't even know if I would have the wherewithal to remember that. But so similarly, in when those emotions arise, to pause, to not offer opposition or try and get rid of. But then I think, as you were pointing out, then the real heart of the practice is learning to feel. To immerse yourself right in the heart of the sensation. And, quite often when we actually allow ourselves to feel the sensation in a very somatic way, sometimes it gets bigger at first, right? Because you're really feeling it for what it is. But rather than getting kind of pulled into the story, staying with the felt sense, and maybe, rather than even naming it sadness, it's like, oh, heavy sensation in my chest or face, tenderness in my heart, and finding some sort of presence right in the heart of the sensation. And, kind of the ego is the tendency to hold on to ourselves and control our experience. Learning to feel is kind of like threatens our agenda to always control our experience, right? Because if we open to our sorrow or whatever it might be, though it might intensify for a while, it starts to, in a sense, crack that tendency to always control our experience, and kind of indirectly actually becomes an avenue to greater aliveness, and if not even empathy, and realizing, oh, this is our human condition in a shared way. So birthing greater capacity for compassion, right?
Oh yeah.
And then, I think it's a kind of a quite common experience in this practice that as we stay in the heart of the sensation, what felt so fixed and so solid, right? Like anger or grief actually begins to kind of unknot itself a little bit, begins to free itself from the body, and eventually reveal itself to be nothing other than sensation. No different, though in quality different, but nothing, just as joy is nothing but, these waves of sensation through the body. So is grief, so is anger, right? So it's in a sense kind of freeing the emotional body to be unrestricted, right? Uninhibited, and in the deeper potentiality, even reveal that deeper dimension of being, in which they're continuously playing, rising and dissolving.
How do you think having a regular yoga practice, it obviously, helps your body. We hear about the yoga arms, and I live in a town where you see a lot of women just coming from yoga and they're super fit. But I wonder, what's going on inside, or...
Well, I find that, whatever gets us in the door, maybe it's the washboard abs and buns of steel, but quite often what happens is, in just working, just like in terms of postural practice or asana practice, I think one of the central axioms upon which yoga is centered is just appreciating the interplay of mind and body. In Sanskrit, it's the play of prana, or life force, which is everything from the most dense and accessible expression of life force to, feelings and thoughts and emotions and sensations, and chitta, or consciousness, mind. And the two are likened to fish that swim in tandem. As one moves, the other follows. So every thought and feeling we have creates a pattern of sensation in the body. So when we affect change in our mind, there's a reciprocal qualitative shift in our soma, our bodies. And conversely, when we work with the body in intelligent ways, and especially that are rooted in, feeling again versus just trying to achieve some, displaced shape from what is our current condition, right? Then as we find more kind of presence and wakefulness in the body, the mind also begins to find a little more presence, a little more ease. So even if we come in just through the body door of, trying to find health, quite often it affects our quality of attention and mind and presence. And, eventually we get curious, like, oh, what's more to yoga? Oh, wow, it's actually this incredibly rich, tradition that looks into the nature of our minds and hearts, the causes of our suffering and the means to kind of finding true, insight and happiness and wisdom. Yeah.
Wow. I want to talk a little bit more about Naropa University. So because I have a friend who wants to go back and, get their certificate to teach yoga, and there's all kinds of programs. What would you say would be the difference with that versus what they would get at Naropa?
We're just fortunate to be able to study within a university context that allows us to really dive into the breadth and depth of the tradition. In a few years, we have the time to kind of both chronologically study yoga from its earliest inception to kind of modern day iterations, as well as kind of the diverse range of practices and views and philosophies, while also culminating in a deep study in how do we skillfully and authentically communicate these traditions and practices for those that have really committed to, this study. So just having the time to give to the depth and breadth of study that yoga really requires, given its kind of vast tradition, I think is something that's just fortunate ability that we have at Naropa, because we have the time and quite a few, some 36 credits of study that cover the philosophy, the history, the language, as well as the practice, as well as kind of teacher training skills.
And how long did you say the program is?
It takes a couple years. Yeah, it's a couple-year program. Yeah, that can either be done as a degree program itself or as a part of another degree program.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's what I was curious about. So if somebody already comes in and they have a college degree, but they want to study the yoga, that's still a couple more years, right? Of doing the full. Okay.
It's also a certificate program for those that already have a degree. They can just do the yoga.
Oh, okay.
Studies program. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's wonderful. I should mention that I did get back into yoga when I was pregnant. I did it every day of my pregnancy, and it made it so much easier. And I still had a hard time. I was not a happy pregnant person. I mean, my back hurt. And I only gained 20 pounds, and then I lost 2 because I had the really bad. Anyway, I won't get into it. But the point is that yoga really helped. I think, gosh, imagine if I hadn't been doing it. But I kind of fell off the wagon after I had my daughter. But now I've been doing Pilates for about 10 years. I just love it. Mm-hmm. So I'm thinking of incorporating some yoga back in. But I think if you can find something that I get really mindful in Pilates because there's little movements and you have to really focus. And I think when you can find something that gets you in that mindfulness state, that's what's so key.
Well, again, it's not exclusive to asana. It's like whatever somatic practice, that really grounds us in this kind of wonderful, rich landscape of sensation. It can be an exquisite journey.
So I do a show called Active Allyship. It's more than a hashtag on anti-racism, bias, white privilege, white comfort, and really getting white people to look at their own biases and, I'm not racist. Well, we're all raised in this society. So let's look at the different levels of bias or racism that we have. Let's overcome it. Let's, make the world better. We talk about cultural appropriation. My daughter is constantly saying to me, Mom, I saw this video and there was white people with Native American makeup on. That seems really bad. That's appropriation, right? Or Mom, I saw this white person and they had this. She's like, she's always asking me. I said, yeah, it is. And she said, well, what about white people doing yoga? And how does that work? And is that appropriation or how, and I was like, I'm going to ask Nataraja because I think you should be able to do yoga, right? I think if you were like, I created this and made it up, well, that's one thing. But if you're giving the acknowledgement to the people who created it, how do you see this?
I mean, it's such an important and rich area of study, because inevitably whenever traditions travel, they're influenced by the kind of the values, of the cultures that they arrive in. And
Right.
so we see this in all traditions, and yoga no less. So I think this has led to a whole range of adaptation. Some that certainly falls into, appropriation and commercialization,
Right.
and kind of a complete whitewashing of the tradition and repackaging it in a way that divorces itself from its roots, in the roots that are incredibly meaningful and central to what has been at the heart of the tradition. And simultaneously, sometimes it's, as one of the founding kind of adages at Naropa is that when East-West meet, sparks will fly. Also, in kind of these cultural kind of interfaces, there's a lot of important dialogue that happens, a lot of questions that are asked that may have not been asked kind of in the culture of origin. So, I think it's a kind of a broad spectrum that really needs to be seen and approached with open eyes, so that we can shift from kind of unaware appropriation to cultural appreciation, right? Where we can understand and apply and investigate kind of the heart of this tradition in a way that doesn't divorce it from its roots or repackage it in ways that are convenient, or worse, kind of lend to our most base kind of commercialization.
Right.
And so we see that kind of very foregrounded these days. There's no doubt.
Is there anything that we didn't touch on, Nataraja, that you wanted to make sure we touch on today?
I just feel, regarding kind of like the practice we touched on in terms of turning towards our experience, like especially afflictive emotions, that I think two things, just it would be remiss not to mention that. One, it's not necessarily the best practice if one is dealing with real trauma. That to go right into the heart of a very intense experience can actually, it's like being in ocean waves that you are confident you can surf versus being in a tsunami that crushes you. So there's, of course, incredible insight in somatic psychology of how you work at a somatic level with trauma, but might not be skillful to go right into the heart of it, as it can actually increase it or exasperate it.
Right.
So with that, it's really useful to practice in the good times. Just like if you have diarrhea, it's not the time to build a toilet. You would have wanted to do that ahead of time. So if we just take those moments throughout the day when it's like a little anxiety or a little like inadequacy or a little self-loathing or tension, to drop in, to feel, to locate in body, to stay with, to offer no opposition, then what often happens is, a resiliency begins to grow, where when the bigger waves come, we kind of have a wherewithal not to bounce off, not to avoid, but, I can do this. Yeah. So rather than like one heroic practice, is like just finding these moments throughout the day, almost like these kind of mini meditations, where we just learn to return, to feel, to turn towards, and, in a sense, re-embody.
This has been wonderful. How do we learn more about you, and then also more about Naropa University?
Oh, yeah, please come find us, check us out on the website, naropa.edu. Whole range of undergraduate and graduate programs, primarily in psychology and yoga studies and environmental studies. And we have, of course, the legendary Jack Kerouac School of Disembodied Poetics as well. So an incredible writing program. Cool. So just a wonderful range of offerings. Well, also, and I should mention, we're also in the process of launching many online programs now.
Wonderful.
Even before COVID, we'd started this process, and now so much of learning has moved to remote online learning. So our yoga studies programs, our psychology programs are also offering online opportunities as well.
Oh, that's terrific. Well, you've been great. It's been such a pleasure having you on, Dr. Raj. I really appreciate it. Do you have your own handle, or are you on social media at all?
Me and social media still have, are strange bedfellows. So
I hear you.
Yeah, yes, I do have some social on Facebook, and you'll find a link through Naropa as well. Yeah.
All right. Wonderful. Well, this has been lovely. Thank you so much for coming on Talk Healthy today. I really appreciate it.
Oh, so lovely to speak with you, Lisa. I really appreciate it too.
This podcast is lovingly sponsored by Naropa University. Since 1974, Naropa faculty have been helping students develop their inner awareness and heart-centered motivations. If you or someone you know wants to live a purpose-driven, embodied life in order to change the world, go to naropa.edu. You are ready for Naropa, where experiential learning meets academic rigor, and we are ready for you. naropa.edu. Thank you so much for listening to Talk Healthy today. Please do rate, review, and subscribe so you never miss an episode. And also, if you want some behind the scenes on Talk Healthy today, or a chance monthly to win my book, Clean Eating Dirty Sex, which is a memoir, cookbook, healthy lifestyle guide. The title is just a play on words. Please go to www.lisadavismph.com. Sign up for my newsletter, and once a month you'll be getting some great information as well as being entered into a contest to win my book. So again, go to www.lisadavismph.com. Get more on Talk Healthy today and keep coming back. There's always great information. Thank you.